Should we start?
Sure.
I'm going to start out with your assignment for next week or the next session. You have taken this week to look at the framework for information literacy a little bit. We had you go in and I think find an item from the framework that you were interested in. So for next time, what Jesse and I want you to do is we're going to have you wrestle a bit with the framework for information literacy. So what we want you to do is we want you to find an assignment, and we want you to take a look at that assignment and map the assignment to the framework for information literacy threshold concepts. Here's the assignment and here's how it matches the framework for information literacy. And then we want you to find an evaluation that you used for that assignment, and we want you to see whether or not that assignment matches or measures the framework for information literacy concepts that you think it does. We asked you to do this with the RSD framework months ago, and basically now we're asking you to repeat that with the framework for information literacy. So in short, how do you know students have learned fill in the blank, whatever it is with the framework for information literacy? And in order to accomplish that, we have posted some resources for you. So there's a posting about before and after students get it. It's a posting about threshold concepts. There is another article, a roadmap for assessing student learning and using the new framework for information literacy. That's a couple years old. That's when it first came out, I think 2 years ago. And then there's threshold concepts, and it talks about implications for course design and evaluation. And then finally, I've posted a video about an example that I did, so you can see what I've done. And then if you could post those examples by April 7th, that'd be great. So that's your assignment for next time. We'll get that off the table before we continue to move on. And then if you want to, for today, you can grab the link to the framework for information literacy. So I have that posted in the group chat if you want to link there too. Otherwise, you can type in framework for information literacy and this scarlet banner should come up. If there's no questions, we can start to talk about what you've done or where you are going, and we can have that conversation. I've posted an example. If nobody has an example, I've posted one of my own that we can talk about. But otherwise, we're going back to describing a struggle your students have doing research. And then we're going to take a look at the framework for information literacy and see if we can diagnose that struggle in relation to the framework. We can start with a statement. If students understood what from the FIL, then they could do what in the RSD, and then take a look at how the two are interdependent. So that was the task for this meeting. And I don't know if either of you tackled that or not. Justin, did you try it?
Yeah, I think I remember too. It was a while. It was before I went on spring break, so I have very fuzzy memories of all that.
Okay.
Let me look up what because I think I posted something into the discussion board. I'm just going to look it up.
And Harry, did you, I don't know if you did anything with this or not.
I mean, because I had to go and teach, I cut off, but I did do the idea that they had what is research, and
okay, yep, and we can
did that in my class/research group, and those I shared those with Sylvia, but I mean those are I found interesting because I had never done that before. It was an interesting way to see what they thought of research. And then how do we break that down? So it
Sure.
was, I mean, I don't think they ever thought about research as a process.
Okay.
Something that they asked to do, or, you know, never thought about the steps involved.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So hang on, Harry, and we'll take a look at those before we break here.
Sure.
Yeah, and so what I was thinking was, so the most recent thing my students have worked on, at least that I have hard evidence of, is a research proposal. So like a funding proposal that they wrote. And it was surprising to me how late in that process they started consulting the literature.
I'm sorry for laughing. I only am laughing because I just got done. Yeah, I'm with you on the same boat. Okay.
Right, because I mean, it's usually, for me, if I'm writing a proposal, it's day 1, maybe 2 that I start digging into the literature.
Uh-huh.
For them, it was, you know, 1 or 2 days before it was due.
So that's,
and I don't know. So I was trying to think about like where's the biggest deficiency in FIL that's causing them to, you know, basically
sure.
just go on their own. And so like, I think, at least my thought was that it has to do with their, you know, research is, so in Scott, it's a whole community conversation thing.
Right.
I forgot what that was exactly called. But.
So that's interesting because I specifically gave an assignment for my students to go look at the literature, like have an idea of what you want, now go look at the literature. And about half of them did it, and now they have the problem and everything is where they need to be to move on. And now they're retroactively going back to look at the literature because there's a larger assignment that's due. And I specifically asked, how does this connect to your literature? And if you say it doesn't, then go find something that does. But so can we visit that idea then for a minute?
Sure.
So why don't you go to the framework for information literacy, and let's see if we can take a look at that. And let's just run through that assignment and see what we find. And I'm not an expert on the frame, so we'll do this together. So basically, they're not taking a look at, they're not being informed by the information that's out there before they start, correct?
Correct.
So as we take a look at this, are all of you at this framework for information literacy page? Harry, are you there too?
I was just looking at your screen.
Oh, okay. If we take a look at this then, and we start going through this, we can start taking a look at where we think this might fit best. And I should start at the top and we can just work our way through it then. So information creation is a process, and I can take a look at it. They're basically taking a look at information has various formats and modes of delivery. Experts look beyond formats, so it's like they're looking for the information. And if we take a look at the knowledge practices and dispositions, we start to take a look at how information is created. One of the things that I got out of this when I started looking at it is that matching the information need with the appropriate product. So there are times when perhaps a blog might be appropriate, other times when a journal article from the library is appropriate, and there's more to it than that, but trying to get students to understand that there are different ways that you can create, package, and disseminate information, and depending on what context you have, it may or may not be appropriate. So Dustin, for me, that doesn't match your item, but your thoughts? Okay, so we can go then take a look at the information has value. And if we go to that, we start to take a look at the idea that information should be cited, that you need to give credit to other people's work. The other thing for me that I began to recognize here was that when I tell students to go to the library and get a journal article, that has a lot of, assumptions behind that. Like, students don't understand why they need to go to the library to get an article, but it's because they're scholarly sources and that's what our professions value. The last time I presented this to my students, I told them that there was all of these assumptions that were made by people giving them assignments, and that they valued the library information above other sources, and that's why they were being sent there. And also to be able to cite people correctly, because that was part of a scholarly conversation that people had.
Yeah, I would say for me that the physical building of the library is less important than, basically I think in physics the difference is, so Google Scholar is good, Google itself is not as rigorous. Yeah. But
yeah. No, and so why, for you, why is Google Scholar, what are the underlying assumptions you make when you send them to Google Scholar?
I mean, really, it's that Google Scholar will give you just peer-reviewed sources. So instead of somebody just typing away in their basement and it gets up on the internet, like, this has actually been reviewed by trusted, credentialed physicists.
And why is that important?
Because you can put, otherwise it could be just somebody's opinion, it could be wrong. Not that peer-reviewed sources are always correct, but you've got a higher probability.
Okay, so, right, and so for me, I'm not sure that my students understood that, and it was implicit, you know it and I know it.
Right.
I started to be explicit with them about why I'm having them go where they are, and why Wikipedia might be a good place to start, but not to end. And things like that. So again, I don't know that this really speaks to your issue or not. I would say this probably still isn't where you want to be.
Yeah, I think there's some valuable things that my students are missing from that, but not with this particular problem.
Right. So we want to try to stay focused on I'm trying to walk everybody through the process that I use, and it may or may not be helpful. I have the same issue that you do. The third frame, research as inquiry. If you go there, we take a look at this. The learners are formulating questions for research based on information gaps or re-examination of existing, possibly conflicting information, determine the appropriate scope of the investigation, deal with complex questions, break them into simpler ones. So, and then if you take a look at the dispositions, consider research as an open-ended exploration and engagement with information. So I don't know, what do you think about this one?
Yeah, I can see some of this in there.
Okay.
A little bit. So I think where I'm seeing the gap between this particular aspect and where my students are is they don't have the information yet. So they're not really able to use it.
Okay. So this one, you can see elements, but it's not really the fit, correct?
Correct.
All right. So let's go down to scholarship as a conversation. So if we take a look at scholarship as a conversation, I've tried to get my students to understand that their reading and their talking and their writing is really a conversation. They aren't sure where they're coming into this or into the conversation. But if you take a look at this, they cite the contributing work of others in their own information process. They're going to contribute to the scholarly conversation, critically evaluate contributions made by others in participatory information environments. I'm not reading them all.
Yeah, this is where, I mean, coming into this conversation, I thought that's where my students were struggling. And I think this is really confirming it.
Yep.
Yeah, they don't see where they fit into the larger whole.
Yep. And for me, this is where I would probably land on that as well. I had some students that said, well, I've had a couple of students, it was last Friday, as a matter of fact. The comment was, I'm researching games and I've come to an article that talks about gaming and addiction, and I'm doing this study with my boyfriend, and he's not addicted because he's not going to go out and shoot people and kill them like this article says. I mean, he plays a lot, and I can't get him to stop, but I don't like this word addiction because he's not going to go kill people. And I'm like, does he ever not answer you? Yeah. Does he ever play for hours at a time and not eat? Well, he might skip a meal, but he isn't going to die of starvation, so I don't think he's an addict. Totally missing the fact that she's describing to me all of these behaviors that indicate her boyfriend's an addict, but she didn't like the article, so she was going to change her study because she didn't like the article and what it said.
Wow. That's not an academic problem at this point.
But it does speak to the thing that this idea of while she couldn't suspend the judgment, it didn't align with what she believed, and so she wasn't going to suspend her judgment to read the article and look at even, it was like you're an addict or you're not. There wasn't like this progression kind of thing. And the other one that I see is this idea that they aren't going to go look for anything that will help them because they don't see it as a conversation. They see it as they're going to do what they're going to do and jump through the hoop and finish.
Right. And I think that might be leading into why I think this is showing up in our students, because this is really hard to get to happen in a research project in a classroom. Mm-hmm. Because you get a snapshot and it's hard to get a conversation in just one snapshot.
Right. So then it becomes an issue of, if you only have these students in a class, I mean, you can do what you can do in one class, but then do you need to start integrating it across the program, or are there other ways that you could introduce, reinforce this idea, or do it, or have multiple people across the program, revisit this over and over so it's not a one-shot deal?
I don't know. That requires a lot more thinking.
Harry, do you have thoughts about this?
Yeah, I mean, as you're talking, as you're going through this, I mean, I had my students in one class give oral presentations on a topical research project. When we were in the field, they gave basically talks about an interesting topic that they were interested in. And it was basically a literature search. But this whole idea, I like this whole idea of scholarship as a conversation. Because what you're taking a look at here is, how do you put this information in the larger context?
Right. And there needs to be, For me, some of the students didn't get it until after they were done with the research project, and they had something that they could present. Here's what I found. And then they're like, oh, well, if I found something and then I presented it, then I'm adding back to the conversation. But making that explicit for them, for me, I needed to make it explicit for them, and I'm still working on how to make it explicit for them. When they start to present, I'll talk to them about, okay, you're gonna do your presentations, you're adding to the scholarly work, the scholarship of whatever field you're in, and it's a variety of them. So now you have more information for you, but you can also start to talk to other scholars, and if you were to publish this, which they will not be doing, but you're adding to the conversation, both your own personal conversation as well as to the conversation of your field by having done this research. But trying to make it overt for them goes back to that idea that Jesse was talking about with threshold concepts. And these are the threshold concepts she was talking about, that all of us have crossed the threshold, so we get that this is a conversation. But we need to come up with ways to get our students to cross the threshold.
Right, so the question is, can we divide this down into smaller chunks?
Yep.
Such as, an oral presentation or a research proposal or a research paper. Are we asking, hopefully by your senior, you put those packages together, but are they getting those packages earlier on? Because you can't do it all in one class.
No. And not only, I think, are they getting the packages, but are they recognizing the packages when they get them? Where implicitly we know this, and so it's one of those blind spots. So I get that scholarship is a conversation. It's something I just take for granted, and I know. It's why I send them to Google Scholar or to the library databases and not to a blog. But how do we help our students understand this? And so, and that ties into what we're asking you to do for next week, because then we're asking you to look at the assessments too, because if you value it, you'll measure it. So how would we, think about measuring whether or not they got it?
I mean, it depends on what you're measuring. I mean, if citations are important or the citation formatting is important, that's one way. If you're looking, let's say, a literature review, is it number of papers they're including, the summary of those papers? How many did they find? Did they visit with the librarian and understand Web of Science now?
Mm-hmm.
Or disciplinary specific, database, be it Google Scholar or be it other databases, were they able to pull up, X number of papers in that topic area?
And for me too, that leads me back to a product versus process type of assessment. So I have products, they have to do an annotated bibliography for me in this case, which goes back to talking about the artifacts that they have. One of the things I'm starting to have them do is go back and actually, I send them to this website and I have them read this and I have them talk to me, reflect on how the assignments that they've just completed ties to this framework for information literacy. So I actually ask them to reflect on which items they met and give me an example of how they did that. I haven't seen them yet because I just assigned that last week, and I and they haven't completed it yet. But I'm starting to make them go look at these and connect them for me. Hoping that they'll look at them and say, oh, I need to do this in order to be literate with information. And I'm not sure how it'll go, to be honest. Dustin, your thoughts?
Yeah, I've been thinking more about, what we could do to measure, how well they're understanding about the conversation. And I don't know, I think something as simple as how many citations are they including isn't great, because that's, you definitely have to, not all citations are created equal. So I like the idea of an annotated bibliography. I mean, for this, it's too late in the semester, but for next time, that might be a good idea as a sub assignment to.
And I don't know, so even if they did that, for me, the annotated bibliography is a product that they've done it. I think one of the things I've added to the annotated bibliography is a sentence or two about how that work contributed to their research project, which this is a new addition because I got some feedback from them that said, yeah, this really didn't fit into my research study at all. And I'm thinking, well, then why did you? The message to me then is, here is an annotation about an item that did not work for me, and I'm including it because this is the hoop you want me to jump. So I told them, if you're going to write for me that the article you found has absolutely no value, then please go back and find another one that does.
Right.
And I think the problem with it, though, speaks to the problem you had, which is they're coming up with their project and their problem that's supposed to be informed by research, but they have their problem and it's all set, and then they're going back and doing their literature review. And some of them, while they're constructing it, I make them go find things, but that still doesn't measure. It measures whether they can do an annotated bibliography and cite correctly, but it doesn't measure if they are starting to cross the threshold to understanding.
Right.
So,
yeah.
and that's something that I'm still struggling with. I don't have magic answers on this one.
Yeah, because I think the annotated bibliography would show that they are listening to the conversation, but it doesn't show that they know what their role is in participating in it.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So as I'm listening to this, in the RSD framework, you have essentially, assigned by the instructor all the way to having done it. And you're duplicating it. While this is looking, and I'm just first time looking at this, right?
No, that's good.
This is, if you're reaching a threshold, the question then becomes, can undergraduates reach this threshold? Versus, is there a scale that they're starting, and it may be that some of these is not the purview of undergraduate education.
Well, that is a good question. Is for me, I want one of the things about threshold concepts that Jesse did or will talk about, or there's a diagram I've seen, and maybe it wasn't in her presentation, but it's the idea that the thresholds, you have different students progressing through that threshold differently. So some may be able to start from a door. If you look at it from a doorway, they might pass through the doorway and be just fine. They get it. Other students may come up to the door and start to get it, and then back up, and then start to get it and back up, and it might take them 3, 4, a dozen tries before they actually cross it. And then others depending on exposure, might not ever get it. So they need practice at it, and they need repetition at it. So the idea is how can we make this explicit, like it's in your face, so that they know where the door is and what steps they need to get there. For me, that's the message, at least. For me, that's my takeaway. And it's one of the things that have come out of me working with both the RSD and the Framework for Information Literacy is this theme that continually runs through both of them, which is making thinking visible. So it's not only strategies to make their thinking visible, but also strategies to make my thinking visible to the students. So a question as I look at these is, how can I make my thinking visible about how I want them to cross the threshold and how I want them to reach understanding, as well as then having them show me where they are on that path of stepping through the threshold from the novice to the expert. And they might not actually get there because I've been working with this for years and they've been working with it for weeks, and it's maybe not fair to ask them to get through the threshold, but can I get evidence that they're at least taking a few steps closer to the door? I don't know if that makes sense or not.
I mean, it's an interesting question as you pose it. I think undergraduates can do, should do research. And I like, this is the first time I've seen this framework, but I like when I was introduced to the RSD because it explained much of the processes that I was doing already, but it made it in a format that I could share with the students.
Uh-huh.
And the issue comes down is that often I'll only have one class with them. And, you know, the idea of writing a research proposal, I think, is great. The question that always comes out is, what do you take out to input that thing? And I like this, you know, I'm going to read through it and maybe even introduce it to one of my classes next week and just say, you know, as we go on our field trips, I want you to think about these things.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And as you type up your field trip reports, we're going to be taking a look at these different formats. They haven't seen RSD, this other, you know, two of my classes. So. Yeah. So it's an interesting way of being as very implicit, but also how do we scaffold their research? How do we allow them to go up, you could say, those steps to get through the threshold?
Right.
Because for many of them, they have never seen or been allowed to do their own research per se. It's
right.
all been prescribed.
Yes, and they're very comfortable if you tell them what to do, well, my students are. They're not so comfortable when you give them freedom to do what they want. So this is actually where I would encourage you folks to work with your librarians because they know this really well. I know when I work with Jessie, she would be able to walk us through here and talk to us about all the assumptions we're making and the number of things we're asking our students to do. So take a look at all of the steps that you are asking them to do. You're asking them to recognize the fact that there's scholars out there. You're asking them to differentiate between different levels of scholarship. You're asking them to recognize things like, when I have my students go in there, how did they conduct what's their research methodology? What did they use to evaluate their students or their participants? How can you use that in your research? So when I'm asking students to go take a look at other people's work, and I'm asking them to extract pieces of that for their own research, I'm really asking them to do a lot of work more than just go find an article and see what they're doing. I'm asking them to really analyze it and pull out all the bits and pieces that I want them, that might be relevant to what they're doing, and then to synthesize and reconstruct it into something that's meaningful for their particular circumstance. But they have a hard time doing that because they don't have any experience actually even doing a research project that goes beyond a literature review. So I'm actually asking them to do a lot of steps, and that's a conversation that if you take this idea to your instructional librarian, they can help you tease out all of those steps and assumptions that you are having your students do, and it might help you focus on what aspects of the task you really want them to do, or how to make it explicit for them. Dustin, did you get connected with a librarian?
I did finally, yeah. Was able to have a conversation with a couple librarians.
So you might take this, it would be interesting if you took this issue to them and see what they said, because I'm guessing they could detangle all of the steps for you pretty quickly, or help you understand all the steps.
Yeah, we
better than I can.
Yeah, well, we did talk about it, and one thing they recommended was breaking things up into smaller assignments. Yeah, when I think that's why my ears have been perking up with that annotated bibliography, because I think that, you know, that really leads into that really well.
Mm-hmm.
No, I exactly what you said, Dustin. I think this idea of what a research paper is something they do not know.
Right.
And so I'm almost going back, and I remember a prof in my undergrad day who basically spent a whole lecture period after we read the paper, and he deconstructed that whole paper for us and saying, this is a scientific paper, as an abstract, as an intro, blah, blah, blah. Here is what those different components said on the, you know, it was tied to the lecture material, but, and broke all that down. And when I see people pulling papers off of, let's say, the Web of Science, Scholar, Google Scholar, whatever, they don't understand those components of the paper and where they need to look for as they're going through those pieces of information. And it's like, I need to break down these I need to break down what I'm asking for into smaller and smaller assignments. I think it's important. The question is, as this may be the only course they get on dealing with this research process or the research, we don't have a research process course for dealing with any of that. So what do I tackle and what do I think is important? Is what it comes down to. I only can do a couple things. So what is important in that? And that's becoming the difficult question is, you know, what do you throw out, or what do you make smaller, and then what do you take out of that?
Right.
Sure.
As well.
And I think one of the things too is to recognize that maybe you don't tackle all the research, all of the process, you just tackle one facet of it or one element of it. So maybe you get them really proficient at looking at how to deconstruct that research paper, and you just concentrate on one facet of the RSD. I'm coming to the conclusion that the Embark and Clarify is the big one, After last week, Dustin, this one came up for me as well as the Embark and Clarify item, and I have an example of that if we want to take a look at it. But if they could do those two things well, it would have them go a long ways towards being able to do the rest of the research process. I'm gonna go back to this. So we've taken a look at this. Do you want to stay here some more and continue to talk about it, or Harry's got some stuff we can look at, and I have another example that I can look at depending on where you folks want to go.
I'm happy either or.
Yeah, I'd be happy to move on.
All right. So I did one for me, and this Dustin speaks the other one. For me, students struggled in part with what you were talking about. For me, they also struggled with refining a general idea. So how does this is an example of one of my students. I let them pick their topics, but one of them was how does social media impact people? And we do a research project in 6 weeks. It's like you need to really make sure this is structured. We ended up, after multiple times, I let them submit an idea and then we talk about it and I say you need to get that more and more compact. Finally, we got it down to how does daily time spent on Instagram, so a specific application, impact anxiety scores, and I made them go find an anxiety assessment tool. So it's during this process where they're refining it. It takes about 3 or 4 class periods for me to get everybody to refine their idea. But I make them go take a look at literature. It's like, great, you want to measure anxiety, go find anxiety tools that you can use, because you're not going to you can just make it up, but let's go try to find something that will inform the process. If they can get a good research question, the rest falls into place easily. Like, how do you assess that? So we can do that. So I started to look at the assignments. So basically in the framework for information literacy, it talks to the same ideas that you were talking about, Dustin, which is they're not going out and looking at the literature. So formulating questions for research based on information gaps or re-examination of existing and possibly conflicting information. For me, they have a hard time determining the scope. They're gonna do research that's gonna take them years to figure out, and I need to get it down to a week or 2. Dealing with complex research by breaking down complex questions to simple ones. So they come in and they wanna look at anxiety and stress and depression related to social media, and I'm trying to get them to limit it. Appreciate that the questions might look simple, but they're not, etc. And so the statement I came up with was, if students understood research as inquiry, then they could embark with clarity on their research projects. So for me, these are the elements that I saw, is that it's hard to get them even to get a structured question. And that's, for me, about 75 to 80% of the hurdle, and it takes a lot of one-on-one work. And if the students, the last 2 bullet points on the left side for me really struck home. So when they get stuck, the students who get help progress much faster and much further than the ones who think they're experts. And I had one student tell me that she already knew how to do research, so it was kind of a waste of time to do the project in class. and she knew how to do a really nice literature review, and she knew how to make a badly worded survey, but I was not able to teach her anything, and she would be able to teach her anything. So as I looked at this, I see this as a big hurdle for me. And then I took a look at how they were independent on the right side. So for me, I've addressed this in part by having them come up with a research question that I approve before they can move forward. So I step them through that. But I still have struggles, much like you do, Dustin, that I want them to be informed by literature, but they a lot of times are not. So the process we just went through, looking at the other frame as well as this one, is kind of resonated with me. So
the question that I think all three of us wrestle with is this whole idea of literature review and going to the literature to try to guide or try to get your research question in place.
yeah,
Dustin's comment earlier on is, do I need to develop an assignment that demonstrates this? That the idea is that we're going to guide you through a process that here is the, here's our research question. We go to the literature. Here are papers that are going to find that. Now read that, and it may be the annotated bibliography. Now we can better define where the research gaps are, or to better define our research question. Have they ever been exposed to a proper literature review?
that's a really good question that I think is intriguing, that I might try to play with the next time I teach the class. So I like that idea.
Because I'm not sure, because I have the same problems that you pose are the problems I deal with, and the question I have to ask now is, have they ever been taught how to do a literature review?
Right. All right, I agree. And so so this might be a question for Jesse, or for your person at a library. It might be interesting to come back and revisit it at some point in time. Let me go through a couple of slides, and then I want to pull up something that Harry sent. Don't sign off yet because we're not done, but for the next time, our current module is 322, and that's what we're talking about now. Our next module is going to start on April 5th, and our next meeting is going to be April 9th. I think we have 3 more meetings to go. Here are the dates that we should pay attention to. And the assignment I went over at the beginning of our time together. Do you have questions about what that is or what you need to do? Hearing none, I am going to share Harry's document.
Yep.
All right. So what we have here is, these are the drawings that Harry's students did. So Harry, you want to talk to us a little bit about what you see or what you found? You've got 13 students, I see.
Yeah, the ones who were in, and these would be more informed, you could say more informed students who I introduced the RSD, and they have to report every week with the Pentagon to me, or have it filled out. And then based off our last meeting, one of the people said, well, why don't they just ask them to draw what research means? And I said, I've never asked that. The assumption is, the research process is the research process. But so I asked them what the research process is, and these are the diagrams that they developed, which is interesting because you had to forcibly have them think about it and then draw it, which I'm going to do in my other classes now, because I find it interesting. What they think it is, and how they, they've already done part of this. A lot of them had to write a research proposal. are presenting at upcoming conference and things like that. Yeah, so I found it an interesting process, and I'd like to see, like, this one's a lot more schematic or drawings versus some people just wrote words.
Yeah. So one of the things you said, some of them are cyclical and some of them are linear.
Yeah.
Kind more of a linear one. Have they, because you talked about going out in the field for a while, and have they been out in the field yet?
Some students have been in previous research last summer, and others are just starting with the team and looking at do that. And some people are using the data sets from others. So there's a huge variety. Like this one is just pure,
Yeah.
you know, like a paragraph.
So the thing that and if I rotate one, then they'll all rotate. I tried that earlier. One of the things I find interesting is that I don't see any field work in here from any of them. Maybe I haven't looked at all of them yet.
No, which is interesting. And
So,
all this data is collected in the field.
That's interesting that none of them have mentioned the field. For me, it would be like that would be a big thing.
Right. You know,
so
and that was the big aha moment for me at the conference down in Adelaide, because I spent time drawing this and using the RSD process, changing some words around and saying, all my research is based out of the field. And so it's that central part of the field work that you do that, and yet the students don't see that.
So that I saw a drawing from you. I don't know if you sent it digitally or if you showed it to me on paper, but you had like a cliff and an ocean seascape.
Yes.
So that drawing, it would be really interesting to show. It would be interesting for you to put their drawings next to your drawings.
I never thought about that, but yeah, because that was at the conference, and then John wanted me to put that up because he had never seen something or seen the RSD put in that type of framework where it was instead of all being in a table format, it was more of, you know, field work, and most people don't understand that field work component. But so yeah, that's a good point. I think I'll try to pull that out.
Here's another question for them is, because you were thinking about field work when you did that drawing, correct?
I was looking at the research process, and to me, the research process is dominated by field work.
Okay. That's really interesting.
A lot of these students were 3 weeks in the field.
So that really illustrates this idea about threshold concepts, because you've obviously gone through the threshold and these folks have not. So I don't know if you have that drawing anywhere handy, but it might be interesting if you did to pull it up.
Yeah, I got to pull it out of the conference because I know that I got to go back to my conference file and see if that's where it should be.
Yeah, that would be fun to look at. So you should post that, if you don't mind. Post it to the discussion. Post this and post your drawing and your students' drawings.
Yeah, and I'm going to do the same process with a class that was just in the field. We collected data down in Southern California.
Sure.
And they haven't had the RSD. They haven't had anything.
Okay. Yep.
So that'll be interesting. I never thought about doing that, but I'm going to do that to that class next week.
All right. Well, that sounds good. So is there anything else you gentlemen want to talk about today?
No, I mean, that's lots of ideas. I got to download the FIL and read through it in more detail, and then meet with Hans, our librarian.
Austin, are any thoughts from you?
No, I'm pretty satisfied.
All right, good. So, well, Jessie had some other commitments with her job, and hopefully she can join us next time because she'll add to the conversation.
Good.
And I hope you guys have Harry, are you on spring break?
I'm on spring break, yes.
Dustin, are you on spring break?
I had it last week.
Okay. So, all right. Well, Harry, enjoy your spring break, and Dustin, enjoy the rest of your week at school, and we'll see you in 2 weeks or so.
Sounds good. Have a good one.
Yeah,
Thanks.
you too. Bye. Thanks.
Bye.